Have 2 hours, I think, for the whole session. Oh, thank you. We got the recording started. That's very good. I'll just introduce each of you and we'll give you each about 20 minutes, 25 at the very most before I cut you off. And then hopefully we'll still have some time at the end for discussion. If you don't use all of your 20 or 25 minutes, you can have some discussion then if you like, and then we can have discussion at the end. So on my schedule, I have Lisa presenting first. So Lisa is a PhD candidate, and I probably will say, I didn't say her last name, but I'll probably say it wrong, and you can say it properly. Lisa Mychajluk? No, not even close.
Don't worry, nobody gets it right.
So say it properly for us for the record.
Mychajluk.
Okay, thank you. Lisa is a PhD candidate in adult education and community development at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, or OISE, if you're Canadian, which is affiliated with the University of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. She combines academic research with personal practical experience to understand how Ecovillage-based learning Ecovillage-based learning opportunities support transitions to one planet living and development of regenerative communities. So thank you, Lisa. Feel free to go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm just going to keep my video off because I do live rurally, and I am getting some notifications about unstable internet connection. So I guess you'll have to let me know if I pause or freeze or whatnot. I can try and turn on my video for the speaking session or questions or whatever or whatnot. But let me just try sharing my screen now. Okay. Can we see my screen now?
That looks great. Just put it on presenter view.
There we go.
Yep, looks perfect.
Okay, excellent. Just move you all over there. Okay, fantastic. Hi, everybody. Yes, lovely to be here virtually. Wish I could be there in person, but I'm excited to present to you today about my dissertation research, which looks at sustainability learning in ecovillages. I'm in the Adult Education and Community Development Program. I do have a background in environment and sustainability studies, though, so I merged these interests for my dissertation work, and I'll be presenting to you today my findings of my empirical research for North American communities. Like I said, it is dissertation work. And what I essentially have done is looked at 4 ecovillages as case studies, generators of learning, and I'm looking at the learning processes and the outcomes that they generate. And I've used the concept of sustainability learning, which I begin in my work by understanding what does that actually mean, looking at the theoretical leanings in terms of defining what learning sustainability actually means. And when I started this project, I reviewed a lot of theory, critical theory, sustainability education, etc., so that I could come to a working understanding of learning sustainability. And for the purposes of my research, I began from a point of understanding learning sustainability as a transformative process that occurs through social practice and helps us learn what's necessary to move out of unsustainable ways of living and move into sustainable ways of living. For my purposes of my project, I framed sustainability and living sustainably as one planet living, so living within the context of one planet's worth of resources. If anybody knows of this concept of one planet living, essentially in the North American context, we're currently living a lifestyle supported by all the global systems of trade, etc., that equate to about 5 to 6 planets of resources annually. So clearly we are at a point of unsustainable development that certainly cannot be sustained into the future. And that's just from ecological resources and systems and services perspective, not considering the sustainability of our economies and social structures, et cetera. So how do we shift toward a one planet context? I look at ecovillages as examples of how we can shift toward a one planet context of living. And when I started my research, which is quite a while ago now, it became obvious that although ecovillages are becoming of more interest to academics and those especially interested in sustainability transitions in general, the actual learning, like what is happening, what is being learned, how is it being learned, the extent to which the learning is transferable to other contexts, generally is not the focus of learning. It is to some extent in terms of learning specific sustainability practices. That has been a focus of some researchers, but in the learning discipline or adult education discipline, it hasn't been a focus. So that's what I was bringing to this research. And I have very basic overarching research questions through the Ecovillage experience. What is learned about living sustainably? How does this learning occur? And what impact does this experience have on the learner? So the communities that I looked at, like I said, they're all in North America. Here's a geographic location map. 3 of them were in the United States, 1 in Canada. Number 1, Dancing Rabbit Ecovillage is quite a well-known ecovillage in the northeast corner of the state of Missouri. Number 2, Twin Oaks Community, which is a long-standing a community that started in the 1960s and is located in Louisa County, Virginia, not too far from Washington, D.C. Sirius Community in the state of Massachusetts, also another longstanding community. And in Canada, Morning Glory Community, again, another longstanding community. And that's in the northern part of southern Ontario, not too far from the capital city of Ottawa. Okay, and on this next slide, I'll go into a little bit more detail about the communities because I think having an understanding of the various sites where the study took place is important in the context of situated learning, which this really is. And also just in the spirit of this conference, I know looking at results of studies that happen within various different types of communities and what the differences of those communities are is important. So I tried to pick communities that had some sort of difference in terms of their focus. So even though we could consider all of these communities ecovillages and the current understanding of what an ecovillage is, there are aspects of them that are different in terms of their organization and their focus. So for instance, Morning Glory Community established in 1969. It's a small community of approximately 24 people. It is it's an off-grid community. It's quite rural and rustic. They have an ecological focus, and the community is on approximately 100 acres of land trust land, which is collectively managed by the community. However, individual community members there are responsible for their own lives and lifestyles. They live in their own individual housing, mainly constructed themselves, and they have a small level of shared resources. Twin Oaks, many might know Twin Oaks as one of the largest communes in the United States. It's been around since 1967. So at Twin Oaks, everything is shared in common. So they have a common purse. It's a large community, it's the largest community that's part of this study. So they have approximately 100 people, and they actually control their populations. So they grow slowly, only growing as long as they have the opportunity to build enough space for people. They live in what they call small living group arrangements. So 15 to 20 people housed in one building. Every adult is assigned one room as their personal space, and everything, absolutely everything else is common. And they do have ecological values are front and center for Twin Oaks community, but I would say that their focus is more on economic and social sustainability. So one of their core values is equality, and developing cooperative humans has been sort of the drive of Twin Oaks since its inception. Serious Community in Massachusetts was established in 1978, actually by founders who had spent time at Findhorn Ecovillage in Scotland, and they wanted to replicate the intentions of Findhorn in their home in the United States, and created Serious Community. It does have a spiritual focus. It doesn't follow one specific spiritual route. Its pillars are spirituality, ecology, community, and education. And it is organized as an educational nonprofit. And so in that community, it's actually the nonprofit that owns all the land and buildings, and residents pay a residency fee to live there in various houses and constructions, and to have access to the land and resources. There's approximately 30 people in that community, and like I said, spirituality, which some tend to more interpret as opportunity for personal growth, is the focus of Serious Community. And Dancing Rabbit, as I mentioned, is probably the most ecological of focused of the four. It was established in 1997. It's had a very relatively stable population of about 50 to 60 people over the course of its existence. The focus at Dancing Rabbit is really on developing ecological homesteads and sharing resources cooperatively. There's a mix of structures there. I put down here, they're a land trust, they're a co-op, they're a commune, and they're a nonprofit. All of those things are relevant in their organization. In terms of being a commune, some of them, that's currently one small living group exists that shares all of their resources and income, and another is in development, and everybody else lives on their own purse. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about each of the individual communities in the short time that I have for this presentation. That's about all I can give you in terms of an overview. I'm really focusing today on the learning outcomes that I can see across the communities. In my dissertation, I drilled down into the specific learning outcomes and the processes in each of the individual ecovillages as well, but it's a lot to cover. So I'll be doing just the cross comparison today. Okay, and just to give you a quick idea of what I actually did. So there was some literature, website, and document review to start off, participant observation. I was in each of these communities for about 2-week visits over the course of a year. I participated in their visitor programming, which was intended to give the visitor an opportunity to really understand the community, its development, its organization, and what it's like to live there. And I conducted over 50 interviews with key informants who were either community representatives, educational opportunity representatives, or in some cases, representatives of their co-ops and participants. So I ventured to get about equal number of participant interviews with people who would be considered visitors. So that would be students, interns, or work exchangers, and people who were residents or members. And I used a data analysis and coding process that looked at the Ecovillage itself as a sustainable or regenerative community and as a learning environment for sustainability. I looked at each of the Ecovillages as generators of learning, so the opportunities, processes, and outcomes learned, and then the experience of the actual participants. So how they experienced the learning, what limitations they felt were on their learning, if they felt what they learned was transferable, and if they felt that they had a transformative experience. Bringing up the Gen map of regeneration to give you an idea of some of the framing that I used. What I really wanted to understand is how the participants saw the Ecovillages as sites of learning and what they learned about sustainability without really leading them to have a certain specific way of understanding what sustainability is. I wanted to see what was most salient for them at the outset, but then I did give them an opportunity to talk to me about how they viewed each of the communities as exemplars of sustainable community or sustainable living, and what they learned using the Gen map of regeneration as a tool. And then this helped. I found what was very common was that people, if you start to talk about sustainability and sustainable living, they focus on the ecological aspects first. They talk a lot about eco-technologies and, conserving resources. Some then start to go toward more of the social aspects of sustainability, and especially considering we're talking about communities and what community life brings to sustainability. But it can take a little bit of probing to have people think more broadly about the full spectrum, the holistic notion of sustainability, which includes these dimensions. So that's why I use that as a tool. I also used it as a part of my analysis for coding and things like that. Okay. Quickly, overarching findings. This is something that I would say would apply to all of the cases, that what is learned is heavily influenced by how sustainable community is enacted in the space in the community where the learning is happening. So there's links there to the collective values of the community's culture, its structure, its practices, its material environment, and its technologies. And all of these sort of act as filters for how participants come to learn and understand what sustainability is. They're also heavily influenced by who's actually there. So their interactions within the community and with people that they're learning from within a community influence what they learn, how they learn, and what they come to understand as sustainability. And this can change over time. So I did have the opportunity to interview people at one community, for instance, who have participated 5-6 years prior, versus other participants who were recent participants. And there is some different, you definitely see some difference. If there was an influential community member that they were learning certain practices from 5-6 years ago, that person's no longer there, then you see current participants don't mention those things because, hey, they're not happening there. So sometimes that can be a really big factor. Definitely how learning opportunities are designed will have an impact on what is learned and how it's learned. In general, though, across the communities, the learning processes were largely participatory, interactive. Many were very hands-on learning, definitely experiential learning. And largely from a learning theory perspective, we would call them having a high degree of informality and a lot of self-direction involved. And that the learning was both adaptive and developmental. So adaptive to the way sustainable community is enacted in each site, and also developmental, meaning that people are developing their ideas of sustainability and how they practice that either individually or collectively. Okay, so you're probably wondering, well, what did people actually learn? I just wanted to take a minute to talk about how they learned first, and then I'm going to get into the what they learned. more specifically. Okay, so what I ended up seeing was that there was a difference between the visitor learning processes and the resident learning processes. And on this table, I show where I saw evidence of this type of learning happening. So as you can see, all of the communities, for visitors, their experience of learning happened a lot through being actively participant in live work opportunities. So really being immersed and engaging in the daily lives of eco-villagers. There was a lot of learning that was very informal, incidental, as just being in that immersive environment, and practice space. So actually getting to live the practices of the eco-villagers themselves. Okay, most of them also had organized courses and workshops and various experience programs. Some of these were open to both visitors and residents. Only Morning Glory community didn't have much that was organized in this way. I think that there was one example of that there, but the others focused on that much more. Online learning offerings, only Dancing Rabbit offered these at the time of my study, and then what we would call temporary learning communities. So for instance, hosting conferences, or in the two communities that had organized visitor programs, which were Dancing Rabbit and Twin Oaks, those cohorts that were there tended to build or see themselves as a learning community, and did show evidence of learning from each other through their experience. From the residents' perspectives, there's a lot more evidence across all of the communities of actual learning through doing, through experimentation. So a lot more of that developmental learning and learning together through the enactment of their daily lives over a sustained period of time of living in community, ongoing practice, both individually and collectively, a chance for a more reflective experience and to learn from that reflection due to the intensity of living a life and having and doing this over a course of a longer period of time. And learning together, there was a lot of skill sharing, informal mentorships, modeling and observing. Most of the community, well, Twin Oaks and Sirius for sure did not utilize much outside expertise or facilitation. Dancing Rabbit and Morning Glory showed a willingness to get outside expertise and help on an as needed basis. I found Twin Oaks in particular on this one had the attitude of, we have a lot of smart people here who know how to do a lot of stuff. We don't need to have other people come in and help us learn. And what I found also very interesting as part of my findings was that what was really evident in my study is how in all of the communities, what is learned is practiced across a variety of spaces. So there's a lot of transference of learning in the different spaces. So for instance, in somebody's small living group or an eating co-op, in the case of Dancing Rabbit, they would be learning cooperative skills and sharing skills, for instance, that then serve them well in perhaps their interpersonal relationships or in different workplaces, for instance. So that was interesting to see. Okay, busy slide, and probably the last one I'll have time for, I think. But what I wanted to show in this one is to just basically show, and categorically speaking, I can't go into all the very fine detailed learning outcomes, but categorically speaking, these are the areas that there was evidence of learning in each of these categories. So there was evidence of learning a form of simple living. There was evidence of learning specific eco-technologies and practices, nature connection, community living and interpersonal relations, a culture of care and connection, cooperative governance and organization, and some aspects of diverse and solidarity economies, and systems thinking. And some were stronger than others, for sure. and the way this was actually learned was the details, let's say, are different. And like as an example of that simple living at Morning Glory is very rustic, it's off-grid, it's very land-based. Some of the related then eco-technologies would be in relation to wild foods, for instance. I didn't see that as much as a focus in the other communities. If you look at Nature Connection, for instance, Nature Connection was happening less at Dancing Rabbit and Twin Oaks. It was important, but the care for the environment was more an enactment of the lifestyle of living a low eco footprint. Whereas at Sirius, for instance, the Nature Connection aspect was very ingrained in daily life. There's an overarching value of reverence for all life. There are various sacred spaces in the community where this can be practiced. So, definitely some differences there in the specificity around what is being learned. Yeah, I don't think I have much time to like stay on this and go into details, but that would be the main point that I like to make there. Laura, I don't think I have much more time. I don't have the exact.
Yeah, sure. If you want to stop there, and then we'll let the other two presenters go forward and see if we have time at the end. Is that okay, Lisa?
Yeah. Let me just show you that I have limitations to learning that also covered in this presentation, and transferability of learning that I could talk about further if anybody had questions. And I'll just end with this quote that I used as my conclusion because I thought this was an important point. Someone said, I could have learned all the topics and aspects at a different place as well, I think, but the way that I learned there, the specific things were unique, I think, because it's defined by the people and their environment. And I think that exact experience I could not have had at any other place in the world. And I think that any participant in any learning experience in any community might say the same thing. And so I didn't end here with questions, but that's sort of where it leads me to really asking questions. So like, what is the relevance? What does this mean for people who are trying to design learning experiences in communities in terms of what they hope people walk away with from their learning experience? Keeping in mind the notion that we want people to walk away with ideas of how to live sustainably, but what exactly does that mean? And how do you achieve that if everybody's experience is going to be different based on their own subjectivities and the places that they visit?
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa. That's wonderful. Thank you. So if you could stop sharing your slides, and then we'll have Tamas get his, are you using slides, Tamas?
Yes.
Okay, so you're welcome to get them ready.
Yeah.
And I'll do your introduction here once I get it back up in front of me. Okay, so Tamas Veress is based at the Business Ethics Center of Corvinus University in Budapest, Hungary. Tamas is involved in teaching courses like sustainable value creation, happiness, and economics. That sounds wonderful, I think, and non-disruptive innovation. Tamas is interested in the political economy of degradative and regenerative economics. So thank you, Tamas, for joining us, and feel free to go ahead with your presentation when you're ready.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is my first time at an ICSA conference, and I have been following the sessions, which ones I could, and I think you have a great time there, and I have already received a lot. So I'm grateful that you gave me a space in the circle or at the table. And in my research and teaching practice, the gravity point that I'm really interested in is that how can we humans organize ourselves in a non-destructive way? And of course, it's a question ever more present. And I would like to approach this problem or this question through two case studies. And quickly, on the left side, you can see Kishmarosh. This is the place where I'm currently now, in these beautiful hills and woods. And on the right-hand side, you can see the university. It's in the downtown of Budapest. This is where we work with my colleagues. So the two case studies will be Health in Harmony, which is a non-profit organization operating now in Indonesia, in Brazil, and in Madagascar. And the second case would be from Hungary. It's called Krishna Valley. It's an intentional community. It's the oldest one. It's the oldest one in Hungary. And to approach these questions, I think conceptual framework or theoretical framework is very important, and not for the sake of itself or not for some self-serving intellectual practice, but because I think that these concepts that I have found through the years come across, they really help to understand our reality and to understand where we are, how we got here, and therefore they really help to point where to go or where not to go. So as I already mentioned, and yeah, and on this picture on the left hand side, you can see this illustration, which is called, it's named the World Eater. So this human machine hybrid is eating the world, and I think it's a very expressive one because you can see the market economy driven military establishment based on fuel industry, and it's a very unpleasant something. And so the project, the task is how to get out of this one. And so how did we get into it? What are the obstacles to get out of them, to surpass this system? And one useful concept is the imperial mode of living, which says that between the global north and the global south, and I know this term is questionable and have their own problems, but for the sake of simplicity, global north is according to Jason Hickel, who is a degrowth scholar, the North appropriated in the last 30 years approximately $62 trillion without fair compensation from the South. So there is this massive transfer of resources, of lives, of efforts, of work, which should be stopped or reversed or somehow make it fair or make it even. The system, this growth-based system, works through cheapness generation. So there is this historian, Jason Moore. He came up with this cheapness generation, and he says that growth-based systems look at nature, food, care, money, and try to make them as cheap as possible, but not only in a financial sense, but also in a sense of dignity, in a sense of making them as much objects and movable and transferable and substitutable as possible. And so this system relies on this total extraction, which needs its own infrastructure, its own legal background, its own type of mindset and worldview or cosmology, if you will. And so the other which I found very useful conceptual framework is what Mark Whitaker, he's a sociologist from Wisconsin University, I believe, that he says that what we call now environmental movements are not new. So this antagonism, this struggle to have good living conditions and not to destroy our future, these processes are not new. He actually looked at China, Japan, and Europe for 3,000 years of stretch. And he says that there is a reoccurring pattern where there are elites who are competing with each other, and there are the commoners who are in a position to serve this competition. So resources and efforts and work are subordinated to this competition. And I think it's really important to see that where we are today now is this accumulation or this line of these struggles, of these efforts. So where to go from here? Where we can turn, where we can find places of resistance, of hope, and of some level of autonomy over our lives, or how we want to live. Oh, and sorry, and also one concept I would like to introduce is this unrepresentative material regimes, which means that, for example, I'm sitting here in the global north, and I live in Budapest, and as an individual, I have relatively few choices on the very big questions, because we are embedded, or in this case, I'm embedded in this big city. And for example, how food, how mobility, how energy is being provided for this city, I have very little, space to maneuver within it. And most of the people in the global north who want to have livelihoods, they have to sell their own labor power on the market. And this brings in many path dependencies and really restricts our movement. But what we can see historically, with the historical lens, is that there is a constant struggle between how to create livelihood and autonomy on a local level. And there are these material regimes that are being introduced and put on from the top. So, it would be really hard to defend the position that people voted and really want to have cities which are based on car-oriented mobility or fossil-based economy. It's just not true, but it's around you, and it's really difficult to escape them. And so one example I would say that can have inspiration for this situation and our energies is health in harmony. So it was established, I believe, 20 or 25 years ago by an American doctor. Back then, she was researching. She was researching the rainforest, and specifically orangutans, and she was speaking Indonesian. And she got very disturbed by the fact that many locals were involved in illegal logging. And so at the beginning, she was very angry at the locals, but then she said that she wants to understand them. So why people turn to logging, and with the help of local friends, she arranged many community meetings, many village meetings, where many different people from different spheres of social life arrived and participated in these meetings. And slowly, through dozens of such village meetings, she understood that the overwhelming majority of locals, they don't want to do illegal logging and legal logging as well. So they don't want to destroy the forest. They very well know that the forest and their own health and well-being is interlinked. But why they do illegal logging? Most of the time because they need cash. Why they need cash? Most of the time because they need access to services. Together with these people, with this community, they have came up with strategies that are alternatives to this logging, and they said that, okay, so we're gonna establish health clinics, and you can get access to healthcare even with less for less money, or with other type of efforts, or with other type of contributions. So for example, you can participate in reforestation. You can bring in animal manure, so again, help the efforts of reforestation. You can do other kinds of work. You can provide craft work, and then it can be sold. And also there is the option of cash. And if a village significantly reduces logging, then everyone from that village receives a 70% discount from the fees. So there is this inbuilt system to have also financial discounts to have access to healthcare services. And they have come up with many other creative arrangements. For example, they do chainsaw buyback. So if I bring in my chainsaw, then they give me $250, which is a significant amount in that area. And they can also help you to set up your own small entrepreneurship. So for example, usually it's to get a fishing boat and to help you to get your catch on the market. Locals said that they want to learn how to grow vegetables without destroying the forest, because it was traditionally the slash and burn method. So how to do without it. So the Health and Harmony helps to bring in educators who teach biofarming, agroforestry techniques. Also, goats for widows means that single parents, mothers who have left without the livelihoods, they are helped, for example, by receiving multiple goats who can help in their livelihoods. And so what we can see, it's already 10 years went by with Health and Harmony being involved in this specific area of Borneo. And what we can see that in this territory, logging is down 90% and child mortality is down 67%. So this model really works to connect the health of the forest and the health of the humans, of the locals. And how it started, it started that the initiators, they didn't stigmatize the locals that they are bad people, that they should be morally judged, but they try to understand their everyday surviving mechanisms and why they turn to logging. And so they coined this term radical listening. And I think it's something very important. I find this idea very important, that it's not a top-down effort, that I know from my air-conditioned office how you should generate economic health, and then it's gonna rise all boats. But it's a completely different approach. It's a radical listening approach. I'm just gonna quickly check time. Okay. Yeah. So the second case that I have prepared for our discussion comes from Hungary, Krishna Valley. So it's the southwest part of Hungary. It's a beautiful part of the country. I had the fortune to visit this community several times. It's 280 hectares, so it's quite a big territory. Approximately 350 people lives there now. They are, of course, a spiritually oriented community. So they follow the Krishna tradition, the Krishna value system. And this is the basis of their collective organizing. And within this spirituality orientedness comes the need for self-sufficiency. And they are self-sufficient in wheat, in fruits and vegetables. And they have set up their own sewage system, which is a plant root-based, biologically closed sewage system. And they have reached near self-sufficiency in water and energy. So they heat their buildings with wood. They have installed many solar panels because they do many small-scale manufacture or industrial, so food production. And for this, they sometimes use machines, and so they need electricity. A very fundamental principle is non-violence. So whenever they engage with the land, with the forest, or with animals, it's non-violence based. They don't use chemicals. And one good example of this, of the manifestation of these principles, is the cow protection, what they follow. So they keep a lot of cows. In their religion, cows are not, they are not saints, but they are looked at as mothers because they give their milk. So they are mothers, and the ox and the bulls are the fathers. And they try to keep the cows with much dignity and respect as possible. And so these animals give milk, but whenever they stop giving milk, they go to the cow sanctuary. So they retire peacefully, and they live a full life. Also, the cows, the baby cows, are not separated from their mothers very early, as in industrial systems. So they can have this psychological well-being. Yeah, so I think it's a great sign or manifestation of this non-violence, of this dignity orientedness. So how they arrange their issues of economics? So first of all, they see economics as an issue of livelihood. So it's about to get enough. So it's about sufficiency. They produce much more wheat than they need, and they sell it, but they sell it to other Krishna-oriented communities, and they sell it for fair price. So they don't accumulate, they don't maximize. They also have substantial tourism. Multiple thousand tourists and visitors come every year. In Hungary, you can decide on your income tax 1% which organization to provide. So they receive a substantial amount from there. And also they operate a food franchise. So there are multiple restaurants. And this franchise has only a 3-page long contract. And it just lays out, so it's a very trust-based, and it lays out the principles, what means to have good food, what means to have dignity with food. And for example, in this, you can find rules like you can't serve coffee because they say that coffee is a psychostimulant, and they avoid the use of that. But so you can be a franchise partner, but you have to follow some certain rules. What I found really interesting in this community is that they have a very strict accounting system. So they have these various sub-organizations. They have their own schools. They have their own manufacturing processes. They work on land as well. So many different parts. And whenever they interact with each other, what we can call economically, they use an inside currency, and they very strictly make the accounting towards each other. And the person, one of the leaders who are interviewed, said that it's a very conscious thing that they don't want to blur the lines that who did how much for the community. So they keep it very strictly counted. Another important point is the relationship to technology. So on the picture, you can see that they use or they rely on animal traction, but they also have smartphones, and they also do photovoltaics, right? So solar panels. So they don't. What I would say that they subordinate whatever technology or methods they use to their spiritual goals. When I asked that what's the limit of your model, they said that, for example, one very important limit is that you can have only as many cows as you can feed without importing their animal feed. So they have very strict ecological limits built in. And when I asked that what's the obstacle for the replication of the model, they said that land. So it's getting more difficult to acquire or to have access to land, which is a global process, and also spirituality. So they say that without some kind of shared spiritual foundation or understanding, it's very difficult to have communities keep running for multiple decades. Yeah, and this is my last slide, just to summarize or synthesize that what we can see here is that to create the conditions for the life to thrive over long term, you can see the approach to economics as livelihoods based. So here they don't want to maximize, optimize, shares, market, or price, or profits. No, it's enoughness, it's sufficiency, it's livelihood centered. They create and try to sustain the autonomy over the main factors of their livelihoods, and of course they impose limits. Just we talked about, and it's really embedded in the local, what you can see very well, I think, in this radical listening process of health in harmony. But there are also, in Krishna Valley, you can find a built-in mechanisms how you can make your voice heard. Yeah, so for the start, this is what I wanted to share, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tamas, for that wonderful presentation. So if you can stop sharing, and Nadine, do you have slides? Nadine, can you turn your microphone on there?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay, great. All right, so if we can get your slides going, I'll do your introduction.
Yes.
Okay, so Nadine Gerner specialized in sustainability as well as gender studies throughout her social sciences degree at the University of Munster. Her quest for practices of degrowth and the convergence of feminist and ecological struggles brought her to study eco-communities. She's a lecturer on ecofeminist theories and practices at the University of Munster, climate justice activist, and currently is planning her PhD in the field of feminist political ecology. So welcome, Nadine. You're welcome to go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Hello, everyone. If my sound is bad, please tell me. I have a headset next to me as well.
Nadine, your sound is a little muffled. I'm not sure if there's anything you can do with a microphone or plugging it in. It's just a little muffled.
This is what I tried to say. So I have this professional.
Oh, that's much. It's not very loud, but it's okay. Okay, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So ecological, but who cares? This is my study, my ethnographic study of social practices and gender in 3 French ecovillages. And in preparation for my talk today, I did some research within the conference program by searching for keywords that matter to me or that I'm interested in. And I looked up in the abstracts and the bios for the word gender, and I found 5 results out of 87 contributions. I looked up the word women and found 4 results, feminist, 3 results, and terms like queer, gay, lesbian, or LGBTQ, 0 results out of 87 contributions. So I know this is not a strong scientific evidence for anything, but I think this somehow underlines why intentional community research needs more feminist perspectives, both in journals, but also in conferences like this one. So at this point, also looking at my PowerPoint presentation, thank you to Jenny, who made it possible that my PowerPoint is as beautiful as it is, because the comic you will see on some slides is edited by Jenny. And yeah, so first I would like to position myself as a scholar activist, as you said in the presentation. So my research is based on fieldwork that I conducted throughout my master thesis, and also on lived personal experiences in intentional communities. I'm living myself in a housing project in Berlin right now, and yeah, this is both very entrenched all the time. These personal inquiries that I started with, because yeah, the personal is political, and for me, the research is political as well. So I started my research by searching for practices of degrowth, and came across eco-communities and eco-villages like this. And I tried to, or I framed eco-villages as a viable path for socio-ecological transformation, because they suggest a very wide array of socially and ecologically interesting and fruitful practices such as permaculture that we have heard a lot about in this conference, eco-building, voluntary simplicity, or sociocracy. And we can get very fruitful insights here into how we can live together differently, far away, or sometimes really literally far away from growth-oriented, consumerist, and productivist capitalist society. So the knowledge that ecovillages offer is based on many years of experiences with alternative ways of living and relating to nature, experimenting with dissident practices, or questioning the hegemonic culture, as we saw it with Zek in Germany yesterday. And yeah, thus creating community life and at best sustaining it over many years. And this is what makes them so inspiring for research. And it makes them also inspiring or interesting for feminist research, because feminist scholars argue that especially collective forms of housing and living together bear a certain potential to transform traditional gender roles by, for example, sharing housework. And I will explain why housework matters so much to feminists later on. So whereas eco-communities are very extensively studied in terms of their eco-performance, their democratic decision-making, their sustainability, their consumption patterns, and so on, very little scholarship has studied gender concerns in eco-communities, as the literature showed me. So one could assume that the progressive and emancipatory label that is often associated with eco-communities makes them more likely to challenge power structures or even transcend or transgress gender biases. However, before going in the field and reviewing the literature review showed me that sometimes ecological or sustainable solutions do not necessarily have very gender just outcomes, and showed me a lot of contradictions here. So amongst many practitioners of alternative lifestyles, the transformation of consumption patterns or production patterns is very important, such as self-provision, organic food production, or ethical consumption. And this is often very central and a part of eco-community projects. When it comes to consumption, a lot of scholars underline the fact that consumption decisions are not made by gender-neutral private households, but rather overwhelmingly by women. So ethical and greener or sustainable consumption is often gendered, because greener consumption practices often involve a shift in diet, so healthier and more ecological products, which imply then a change in preparation and cooking method, which are likely to be more time intensive and require a certain knowledge, and that is very frequently falling back on the caregivers that are overwhelmingly women. And this means a higher mental load, or the so-called second shift, that when you have to do care work on top of the wage work that you do in general. Another interesting contradiction that we have to keep in mind in studying ecological practices in ecovillages is that numerous scholars embrace concepts such as conviviality and technology critique. And I have a quotation here of an ecofeminist scholar, Mary Mellor, who says that I don't think many degrowthers realize how heavy a care burden work will be without domestic equipment, cookers, washing machines, hot water, vacuum cleaners, etc. It's not an argument to keep them, but domestic work is going to take a lot of the day. In most communities, this falls to women. I am troubled by how much attention in the literature is given to welcoming increased leisure time by male authors. So the problematic I wanted to spot here is that sometimes low-tech practices or low-impact lifestyles go hand in hand with such realities, and especially if we look at the localist or rural realities of some eco-villages, even if eco-villages are not categorically rural, but in the case of rural eco-villages, sometimes we can observe an idealization and romanticization of the rural back to nature imaginaries, because they are inspired sometimes by the back to the landers movements in the 60s and 70s. And what then comes along with this, namely more traditional gender roles or a certain backlash to traditional gender roles and so-called natural gender divisions of labor, is what we have to keep in mind when studying the practice. So the underlying thesis to my study is that in such places where we critique or we criticize capitalism, the growth paradigm, or mainstream society, as I heard it a lot throughout this conference, where this is put into practice in everyday life, are patriarchal structures challenged too? And if so, in which ways? So maybe for this, one has to understand how capitalism and patriarchy are intertwined, which is a really big question of broader societal analysis. But to maybe understand my ecofeminist point of view here, and to understand why I am asking these questions and how I analyze my findings and draw my conclusions, I would like to let you know that I conceptually draw upon feminist degrowth, ecofeminist theories, and feminist growth critique, which actually puts a focus not only or tries to say that the focus that is laid on the changes in production, on changes in production and consumption, like energy provision or gardening, and these are often the anchor points of living differently, sometimes obliterate or invisibilize the so-called sphere of reproduction or the social reproduction, which is also a very broad term from a materialist point of view, but I would like to define it here, because social reproduction can be defined as the socially devalued and invisible tasks and labor which is needed in order to sustain societal life on a daily basis, but also to enable its regeneration over time and generation. And even if this is a very broad societal concept, I think ensuring the continuity of society as a whole is also what takes place in intentional communities, which are also based on often unaccounted, invisible, unpaid work of people, and maybe sometimes overwhelmingly women and other marginalized groups, and even the work of nature. So the work of nature to regenerate, to provide the soils animals are living on and humans are planting on, and so forth. And this is also why feminists are so obsessed and interested in what I call the reproductive sphere, that has, as you see, nothing to do or something to do, but not only with biological reproduction or something, but it's just the very basis of what nourishes society and capitalism. It also makes it possible that production can happen, but also that exploitation can happen of nature, of marginalized bodies and groups. So this might seem very broad, but the other theory I use for my study is social practice theory. And social practice theory suggests that these societal formations also have an impact on the micro level. And I am using social practice theory here to show that the actions of the individuals and the agents are embedded in these very social structures. So I am interested in how gender is entangled in the social practices on an organizational level. And the three elements of social practices that Elizabeth defines are materials, images, and competences, which you will find in my findings again, and then understand a bit more what is behind this. So I'm particularly interested in these unpaid, in the sphere of unpaid care work and housework, such as cleaning tasks, diet, child raising, food preparation, and supply in eco-communities or eco-villages. And my guiding questions are then, how does gender shape the community's organization and practices, or more precisely, who does what and why? Who does the additional care work in eco-villages, and which importance is accorded to care and reproductive tasks? What does that look like in practice? And which role does gender play in the everyday life of the communities? As I said, I don't have pictures from the communities because they stay anonymous in my study, because I had very intimate personal exchanges with the people. I could give you some more hints or tell you a bit more maybe in the discussion, but I studied 3 eco-villages in France, selecting them by viewing community listings of GEN, of the foundation of the intentional community, by Mouvement Colibri, and then limited it to my closer surrounding at that time. Had several communities with various profiles, and then in the end had to choose very pragmatically because it was only a master thesis, and it took also place in the context of COVID. And I was happy that it could take place at all. So the final selection is one vegan eco-village, one rather spiritual eco-village, and one eco-village that I would identify more as a co-housing community. But what they all have in common is that they self-identify as eco-villages. So I didn't select them with that institutional definition by GEN or something, but by auto-determination. So bracket to time, I will go on to my findings. And I identified certain different groups for my finding. And the first one is that I could observe a revaluation and a shift in the meaning of care in the communities that I studied. So this means that care or caring relationships were at the very center of everyday life and appears to have the central place, both materially and symbolically. And I will explain what this means in a minute. So symbolically, I understand that caring activities were given a positive connotation. For example, well-being and emotional care took or had a certain space, occupied a certain space in the regular plenaries, for example, through emotional check-ins, and the role of emotions was always very predominant or as important as, for example, the organizational topics. As well, non-violent communication or spaces to express gratitude, for example. So linking this to literature, I could observe elements of caring about and caring for, caring with, in the sense of Fisher and Tronto, that played a very important role in the everyday life of the residents. And I think you've seen that I didn't give you one definition of care, for example, because I also wanted to see in the fieldwork what the eco-villages, with what definition of a care the ecovillages come up, because there are many definitions of care in the literature, and the definitions always get extended because they are never enough. And the definition that the ecovillages adopted was a very extended one, a very extended understanding of the notion of care, also involving emotional care or self-care, for example. So self-care, daily meditation, personal development, mantra chanting, and so on. And also focusing the distribution of tasks, or basing the distribution of tasks on the needs. So do I feel like doing this task today, or how do I feel, and space to share this with others. Revaluation of care also took place by making caring activities a collective task. So taking it out of the private sphere into community spaces. And for example, by having or establishing cleanup Mondays or community Saturdays, and creating a positive event where everyone takes part in, and yeah, making it not the responsibility of one person. And this process of commoning care, as it is often called, or collectivizing care, is also very fruitful, or has a lot of potential to distribute tasks in a more gender just way. Then last, the financial revaluation of care. So one community had an interesting model, something like a basic income, where even cleaning tasks, or the role of cleaning or having more housework likely tasks was as valued financially as other tasks. So as I said, the central place of care also manifested materially, for example, by putting care in central places in the physical arrangements of the community, for example, community kitchens, common living rooms, common children's rooms, shared laundry, and so on. So here physical infrastructures have a certain potential as well. Then the reorganization of care. So as I said, material infrastructures play a role here. For example, that tasks are noted on the board, who is responsible for what, a certain rotation. Also concerning shopping errands, to, for example, share responsibility when one goes to the market or the local food store, which then implies less care work for the individuals. And then another element was competences. And I have a quotation here that shows that space is not the same for everyone. So this concerns a garage, like a working space where you can do craft work, and where a resident explains that she doesn't feel or doesn't appropriate that space so much because she lacks the necessary competences to deal with the tools and so on. So as this quote shows, a certain gendered use of certain spaces was observed during my study, and very traditionally male members would be observed in the garage and carrying heavy stuff, whereas female residents would gather in the garden, in the kitchen, or interact with lighter objects. And this resonates with what I said in the beginning concerning low-tech gadgets, because the gadgets, like for example a solar shower or a low-tech laundry, that need certain competences to use them or to fix them if there's a problem. Whenever there was a problem with these objects, residents directly referred to the older, technically skilled male members to, for example, repair these low-tech gadgets. So here we can see that skills and knowledge around these materials are very monopolized by a certain gender, and this creates a certain dependency as well, and barriers to make use of it independently. So one might ask, how can we change this? And there often the answer was that one just has to ask, and residents would instruct others, for example, women, with pleasure. And this puts the responsibility of actually challenging very structural imbalances and gendered socialization on a very individual level, which is also a very neoliberal approach to change, actually, that the individual could elevate itself from societal structures. So this also neglects the fact that personality or interest, so if people would say, they are just not interested in this or that topic, or this their personality, that interest and personality are actually a product of socialization in binary gender roles, which you can see also in this quotation. Maybe it is because we were looking for people who know how to do something, that there were more guys who came. At that time, we were looking for people who knew how to do things. This was about searching for new residents, actually, and drawing this to intrinsic differences between men and women. So one could link the practice of who does what to a certain point, let's say feminist point of view, namely the difference feminist point of view, that so for example, this claim expresses that there is a certain difference between the genders, attributing certain physical skills and competences respectively to men and women. And this is what is underlying this claim, and sometimes certain practices in villages that I observe. And this is not only what I observed in the context of crafting activities, but also concerning the so-called women, nature, mother nexus that views women as closer to nature because of their supposed biological capacities of reproduction, and thus imposes on them a natural responsibility or certain affinity to raise children, for example. So to wrap this up, what it would need, or what I could identify as challenges, are to deconstruct gender norms, rules, and performances. And this especially manifested in the central role of the nuclear family in the communities. Family is an important element in the ecovillages I studied. And if parents were relieved of their work with their children, their care work with their children, thanks to the community, this often was rather a side effect, because there are common playing grounds or a children's room. But there were, except of these spatial arrangements, no organized share of childcare responsibility or true co-parenting system that took the childcare responsibility away from the nuclear and heterosexual family. So heteronormativity also played a major role, linked also to a very strong, let's say, procreation pressure. So if a couple, heterosexual couple, came to the ecovillage, the community was expressing a lot the wish to welcome more families with children and having this image of a heterosexual family in mind. So when I had a more in-depth discussion with a queer member of one community, he would underline that it was very difficult under these circumstances to be the only member representing the queer community in this context where the heterosexual family is the only visible and wished configuration. So yeah, queer invisibility pervaded very much the language, the corporalities, and the materials of the communities. Although there were opportunities, for example, to build compost toilets in a gender just way, because they are quite gender neutral if you build them. And still there would be drawings and wooden plates with little girls and little boys. Yeah, to differentiate. And to sum it up, I opened up some challenges, what it would need to turn towards maybe more feminist eco-villages. As I said, this one member that talked about his feelings as the only queer persons in the community said that the word queer would just not resonate with a lot of people of the community. So I think it would need not only educational inputs or measures, but also ways so that people, or role models, so that people could identify with someone. Because if there is no queer visibility, I think it is very difficult for other queer people to identify with the people living in eco-villages. And also offering the space and the privilege eco-villages have to, for example, events or group or gatherings. But when doing this, really supporting the ideas behind as a whole community. And then to also break this norm of the nuclear family, one would also need a space to experiment with, and I wrote new and old because usually nothing is really new, care arrangements and kinship instead of this configuration of the nuclear family. Yes, and maybe to sum it up, thinking of power relations from the start and not after 10 years of practice, to identify or realize that there are these challenges. I would be interested in communities that really think about power imbalances and power relations from the start and not see it as an add-on. And I wonder if for further research, there would be other insights, for example, in radical left spaces, in lesbian communities or only women communities, anarchist communities, and so on. Would be very interested in such experiences as well. And maybe you also have to share some insights from the communities you studied. I would be very interested in that for the discussion. So thank you.
Very much, Nadine, for that presentation. I love your cartoons. So we have some time left. If anyone either connected in Zoom or in the room here has any questions or comments, you're welcome to raise them now for any of our three speakers. I see Jenny online has a question, so feel free if you'd like.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. It's cracking up just slightly. I've got a question that crosses Lisa and Nadine's great talks. Thank you. And I'm just wondering, so I absolutely resonate with everything Nadine said. I'm wondering, therefore, to the both of you, whether you'd seen any evidence of, in that learning, in that training, that these issues around the feminist approach and social reproduction were touched upon. And Lisa, I'm looking at your diagram of the things that get learnt in these spaces, and they use words like culture of care and interpersonal. But was there anything about what?
Sorry, there's something wrong with the sound in the room. Can you hear me, Sylvia?
We can hear you.
No. Nadine, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. No, sorry, I think the sound is, something happened, the sound in the room. I'm just talking to you. through my computer. I did see, Jenny, you said first you had a question. Would you like to ask your question now?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can't hear you, Jenny.
They can hear me online.
Sorry, having some technical difficulties. Nadine, can you hear me? Okay, sorry. I can just see you clearly on the screen.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I think we're back. Sorry, it's just something just happened with the computer going down or something. Jenny, would you like to ask your question, please?
Okay. So thank you all of you for fascinating talks. This crosses Nadine and Lisa's work really, which is I've recognized what a lot of Nadine has said, and I was wondering to Lisa whether there was any discussion in the trainings and the learnings that the group she'd worked with had touched upon power and feminism and care. In your summary table, you've got cultures of care and interpersonal, and yet the examples don't actually seem to touch upon what Nadine is talking about, which is a far more radical reimagining of what it is around gender and sexuality. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Jenny. Actually, yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question because as Nadine was speaking, there were examples coming to mind that I did want to share. And part of the reason why it might not have come across clearly in my presentation is because I was doing a lot of comparison across the cases and not really drilling deep down into the individual communities. But one that I did want to mention for sure, and I think might be of interest to Nadine as well in her work, is Twin Oaks community. So Twin Oaks was the one community where it was very clear that learning sustainability and learning what sustainability is was very understood through experience as holistic, and specifically that achieving environmental objectives resulted from a focus on economic and social equality. So by attending to those aspects of equality, there were a variety of outcomes and an understanding that unless you attended to those things, then a lot of those environmental objectives couldn't actually be achieved. So to use an example, and Twin Oaks as well has actually been referred to by some social anthropologists as being probably the example of the most feminist society that ever was, and I guess in the Western conception of that, but definitely worthwhile looking at from that perspective. Linked specifically to its founding approach of equality and the system of work, which is a labor credit system in which all work, regardless of whether it's income generating work in one of the community's businesses or whether it's the wide array of care work that occurs in the community, which basically in their society, which provides for member needs from cradle to grave, or vast array of other social work and meeting everyday living needs, it's all valued equally. So an hour of work in any of those areas is one labor credit. And so you see a lot of interesting results in that. It's probably the least gendered work that I've seen. Now, what I did kind of find was interesting is that even though I say that it's the least gendered work, people still tend to make choices, because they do have choices of what work they do, that you do still do see gendered workspaces. Like I still saw a lot of old white guys, for instance, driving tractors, and I still saw a lot of women working in the gardens. But again, these tend to be more in terms of choice. These spaces are open to everybody. And Twin Oaks has also made it a point to provide teaching credits in order to ensure that skills can be learned that aren't necessarily attached, like some of those eco technologies you were speaking of, Nadine. Learning to fix things, for instance, has been an area where there's been a lot of work to ensure that those were skills that that everybody could possess and make contributions to the community in that way. Another interesting point in relation to learning specifically is I came across a very interesting article specifically about gendered work at Twin Oaks that talked about how that learning occurred. And they did find that when they had, in their earlier years, when they had men teaching like wood skills, for instance, women learned less. But when they had workshops that were women-led around those, there was a much more collaborative learning environment, and women learned more. So that was just one example of how learning occurred in a gendered way, is something that they had to attend to. The other interesting thing at Twin Oaks as well is because of this, the communality of the economy, people's well-being, their financial stability is not linked to a traditional family unit. You're not tied, you're not vulnerable and tied to another person for your financial well-being in any way. You're tied to a community as a whole. And as a result, what you see is there's a lot more the existence of what you might call non-hetero or non-traditional family arrangements. And that way so it opens up a space for that to be, to exist and to be experimented with, for instance. So I found the presence of that much greater than in many of the other eco-villages that I visited. Now, Dancing Rabbit calls itself a feminist eco-village. During my time there, I saw less of what I would call feminism in practice. But that's not necessarily that it's not occurring. In my time there and through my study, it's not something that was prominent enough to make it into my findings. So, I mean, it could be something that could be explored more. The other thing that I found, and what I wanted to point out, is at Morning Glory, which was perhaps the most low tech of the communities. I mean, I keep on calling it the most rustic, the most land-based. I mean, to the extent that none of the buildings have running water, for instance. People go to a well for all of their water right through the, frigid Canadian winters. And so it was the biggest example of the most simple living. And one of the clearest points that came out of my study there are the respondents who said, and all female respondents, that simple living is anything but simple, and that our daily lives are taken up, so much of our time is taken up from basically meeting life needs around food, around home heating, cooking, gardening, etc., carrying water, washing clothes, the list goes on. So again, I didn't follow those feminist lines of inquiry at those communities, but I think that it definitely speaks to your point of how the so-called lower tech we go, the more of a burden is placed on what's traditionally considered care work or women's labor to meet daily life needs.
Thank you. I see a couple other hands up. Did you have a question? Okay, we have a live person. Can you come up here and talk into the microphone? If you come here, they can see.
Okay. Thank you for our presentations. I have a question to Risa, and yeah, thank you. And I am from Japan, and I know some Japanese ecovillages. One ecovillage focusing on education of sustainability, and they're offering program for the school trip of high school students, and they're hosting almost 1,250 students in their eco-village. And yes, they offer some programs for the student. And also they're preparing for hosting the training of company, training for sustainability in the companies. So yes, is there any cases hosting such a big groups in your research? Yes, that is my question.
I think you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, so out of the 4 communities that I studied, I know that none of them were specifically focused on training companies. If you're familiar with Finborn Ecovillage, I know that they do have programming that is specifically focused on, I guess, professional training or company focused training programs. So I don't know if that would be something you would want to look into. In terms of students, let me think. So like student groups, Dancing Rabbit was one that definitely welcomed student groups. For sure. You said 1,250 students, though, all at one time? Is that like all at one time or over the course of a longer period of time? I wasn't sure. Yeah, sorry, I can't hear that. Laura, I can't hear.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, they are hosting the students at once, and because they are very small eco-village, so they have to divide the students to some places, and yes, so some programs, and yes, and they're doing at the same time and in another places, not in other places.
Yeah, I wouldn't, so specifically that larger group at one time, I couldn't speak to that myself, but I mean, if you are somebody who would like to get in contact with either any of the communities that were part of my study, I would probably recommend Dancing Rabbit Ecovillage to get in touch with the executive director for the Center for Sustainable Culture and Cooperation, because they are organized as an educational institute. So they do have a lot of experience with organizing for groups of a variety of sizes. So yeah, Dancing Rabbit Ecovillage, I would definitely contact their educational institute. And then in terms of Twin Oaks, they don't offer a lot of student programming, but they are very skilled in organizing conferences. They do 3 different conferences. Actually, maybe this was another thing I should have mentioned earlier in terms of gender issues. They do offer a women's conference annually, and they do have a queer gathering annually, and also intentional communities gathering. So in that way, they might have some insight to offer in terms of organizing groups at a smaller community.
Okay, thank you. So Sylvia online, could you go ahead, please, with your question?
Yes, okay, thank you. Just a very fast question for Nadine. As I'm in France and that you talked about 3 French eco-villages, but that you choose to keep them anonymous, I was wondering, was it a part of your methodology, or was it because you felt that the subject could be tense and that it could bring some tensions inside the community? And you were talking about one of the colibri movement, and because one of my field of research was le hameau des buis, I was just wondering if it was one of the points, but maybe you cannot say anything at all. But at the time I was thinking about them, but because at the time I was there, it was, I think, end of 2017. The situation was really tense, and they had a lot of questions after, yes, at the moment I was there, and then after, and they were at the limit to collapse. So, but I think that now things are going on, but there was also this question of gender and feminism going along with the their educational program. So I was just curious about how you did choose to keep them anonymous. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah, I thought a lot about how to deal with this and if I would make it anonymous or not. And I think it was a choice of, yeah, maybe so that people could express more freely, because I think it makes a difference if afterwards people read the work and see quotations. They know each other so well from everyday life that I think they could easily identify themselves in what they say about themselves and each other and about the community. So I think I really wanted to create a space where they could express everything very freely. Even if I think that most or a lot of the things were new or things that they had already discussed about. I think it depended on the community, how openly they discussed these topics. Sometimes I really had the impressions that it was also their first time that they thought about such questions with me. So maybe in that case, it could have created conflicts or conflictual dynamics. So yes, I chose this in the beginning, and yeah, this is why I don't have pictures or something, or that I cannot really talk about which community it is. And I think maybe in the future I might change this. I don't know, because it is also nice to have the names and yeah, to be more transparent with this. But yeah, feminism and all these topics, they are very personal and intimate and political, and yeah, they can create tensions.
Okay, thank you. Who do we go to next? Bonnie. Okay, Bonnie, if you have a question, go ahead, please.
Thank you for all of the presentations. And I would like to just particularly, I'm so grateful to hear conversation about gender issues that are so important. And I have a question for you, Nadine. I am an older woman, I'm a grandmother, I've raised children, I've worked in the workplace in different places. And I'm very interested in intergenerational relationships between women, older women and younger women. And I'm wondering if I'd just love to hear your experiences. I'd like to know how you feel older women could support you more, and if you have ideas of how younger women can support older women more or more effectively.
That's a great question. I think I would have to think about it for a while, because it's very practical. But actually, it is what struck me a lot as well during my research, that there were differences in age that sometimes, yeah, that actually led to situations that younger people or younger women left the community because of conflicts and different opinions and values with older women. And also, and I think this is not only linked to gender, but might intersect the experiences. This is what in many contexts of collective life or collective organizers or organization, one can observe that experiences and how long you are part of a collective project create hierarchies and also create certain attitudes of we have talked about this 10 years ago. We don't need to talk about this again. But accepting new members in the community, I think always means that one has to question again, over and over again, maybe the mission and the values of the community, and also renew it and adapt it. And this is a continuous, sometimes friction, but also process of like walking together or walking with each other. So I would say staying in the keeping up the discussion and the exchange and not stopping to talk about certain topics or and I think here Ecovillages have a lot of tools at hand to how to resolve conflicts and how to go into discussion with others. But sometimes these political discussions that, in my opinion, would be needed, they are evaded, or people try to not have them because there are, as I said, very sensitive topics at stake. So I think one example that I also showed in the presentation is this understanding of what is gender actually, and what kind of feminism are we convinced of, or do we want to practice? Is it a feminism where we think that there are only two genders in the world, or is it a queer feminist view? And even if a lot of communities say that they are somehow not political or don't want to position themselves, I think this political position can have very concrete implications on everyday life, and who is going to feel well and live well together in a community, or even join the community. I hope this answer is satisfying.
Thank you. Dan, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you all so much. This is really a wonderful session and a great way to round out our conference. I have a question for you, Tamas. I want to thank you for bringing to our attention two communities or organizations that are quite different from most of those we've been talking about this week. In the one case, because of being rooted in traditional communities in the global South, and in the other because of having a very strict religious orientation. And so I wonder, as you listened to Nadine talking about gender and to Lisa talking about education, were you mostly thinking, wow, these issues are just the same in the communities I'm studying? Or were you mostly thinking, the communities I study have a very different story to tell about gender and about education?
So what I realized when I was listening to Nadine's talk is that how in these cases, how much I didn't look at gender issues. But I would like to connect with another case that I didn't illustrate today, but I try to learn as much as I can, is the Rojava example in East Syria, and the whole genealogy movement and these things. And yeah, so just to get back, I when I was listening, I don't know much the between the sex roles in Krishna Valley, for example, and I cannot tell you a lot that what happens in the tropical forest with health and harmony, with the livelihood issues of women and everyday practices. I just haven't looked at it. So good question. Oh, and sorry, and while I'm having the word, I would like to connect to Bonnie's question, because her question was specifically on the elder and younger women relationship, but I was involved in so we called it Life Stories, and what we did is that we connected high school students with elderly people. We said elderly people is everyone above 70. It's debatable, whatever. That was the definition. And the idea was that a high school student could approach an elderly person. It was in the southern part of Slovakia, where there is a big Hungarian minority. So the idea was that wanted to share his or her life story, then she could join the process, and a high school student came to his or her house, or they met wherever they have organized. And so there was the one question that the younger said to the older: please tell me your life story as you remember, and just go on. And so these conversations, I had the fortune to participate in multiple dozen of those in the last few years, and they really connect on a deep level. I don't know if an intentional community where there are conflicts and you meet with each other on a daily basis, what it would do. It's important that the younger interviewed the elder, but we didn't know them. And it was quite possible that we're never gonna meet again. So therefore, very personal narratives and family stories could be told with the complete knowledge that now I have told you this, dear youngster, and you're gonna go away with this story, and it's some kind. But it's a very powerful method, and I'm not sure if it works in intentional communities, but it works very well between loosely.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other further questions? Anyone here or is connecting by Zoom has for us? That was such an excellent presentation by all of you. As Dan said, I think a really nice way for our last session of the conference. So thank you all very much for joining us in person and having so many of you connecting with us by distance today. That was really great. So have a great rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Lori, and everybody.
Bye.